Hello and welcome to the Mountain West Archive, a podcast where we discuss books about life and culture in the Rocky Mountain West. I'm Ayaz,
And I'm John.
and we are discussing Ted Conover's book Cheapland, Colorado, about off-gridders in the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado. So far, we've discussed Ted's week-long visit to the valley, where he meets people from La Puente, a social organization operating out of Alamosa, and his visits to the flats with their volunteers. So, how's it going, John?
It's good. I think I've listened to this chapter maybe 3 or 4 times now. The most recent today after listening to last week's um
Podcast.
chapter 1.2 or whatever.
Yeah. I've also, so I've read all these chapters. I've read it probably three, four times as well. So the first time was like the first pass through, even before deciding that I want to do the podcast. Then it was when I was like reading through to see what has happened in the first chapter, how to divide it. And then when I was like taking more specific notes. And then again, when I sort of drafted the podcast script. So three or four readings is about what goes into. Maybe we are overdoing it, but for now, that is how the process has worked.
Yeah.
How has the weather been in Phoenix?
I'm such a wimp about it. So I'm wearing two jackets in a house with air conditioning. So it's pretty nice out for
Yeah,
for
for
people not from
context,
Phoenix.
for people listening to this in the future, like we're recording the weekend after the Arctic blast. So in Colorado, the temperatures were in like -8 Fahrenheit, and other places they went down to like -30. So it was cold over the weekend. I survived by going to Houston for the weekend. So I
Did you
wasn't
check
here for the worst of it.
did you look at the weather in Alamosa during the what was it called? The Arctic blast? It sounds like a
Should
cereal
have.
brand or
I
a
should have. Someone left a comment today on Twitter saying the average January temperatures in Alamosa are like -2 Fahrenheit in the valley out on the flats.
okay.
How would you like
Yeah.
that, John?
I would not. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, there's a clear understanding of really decent weather in the world. Like everyone that lives in Nepal lives in the bottom of Nepal because that's where the good weather is. It's basically like San Diego year round. It's like 70 degrees. And I think there's 35 million people or something that live in that concentrated area.
Yeah.
They get it. They're not living in the Himalayas. Like, yeah, let's go hang out in -2 or whatever.
I
Nope.
mean, that sort of answers why San Luis Valley is not super developed, right? Because of
Yeah.
how bad the average January temperatures are, even though it's sunny.
But well,
So,
that and infrastructure. Because
yeah, I
I mean,
mean,
North Dakota's terrible and most of
if
Canada.
people wanted to live there, they would develop the infrastructure to sort of, yeah, it's a lot of factors. I'm just saying this is one of the factors.
I can't outside of water. Um, there's a
No good
isn't
reason.
there a river in Alamosa? Yeah, there's a river that goes through there.
There is,
Um,
but there's water right issues
okay.
and stuff like that. Remember, they didn't allow them to dig a well on their own property. We discussed that in the last episode.
Yeah, yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
So then I mean, it's probably developable once the farmland is, all sold off.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Phoenix is a valley just as much and was a bunch of farmland and now isn't. It's a bunch of houses. But I could see it. But the water thing is real. Like how are you gonna no one in the Colorado collective, whatever that partnership is between the 8 states that use it, is gonna say like, yeah, you know what? Go ahead, build a pipe, build a whole town. We can do this. It's just
Yeah.
not that's gonna happen.
So in the last episode, we looked at how La Puente was helping people to move into the valley by offering them firewood, clothes, and stuff like that. And in this episode, we will take a look at what the county is doing, on the other hand, what the county's approach is, and their attitude towards uh, these settlers or people out on the flats. County services were growing, strained by demand from prairie dwellers. They were deemed to be needier than most and more likely to require attention from law enforcement and occupy jail cells and social services. There were also aesthetic challenges. There was no trash pickup out on the flats, so most burnt it in barrels or in a pit. But trash is hard to control in windy environment, and some of it gets away. Perhaps more of a problem was that what would happen if a settler's dream fell through. In the pioneer days, they would leave behind a log cabin or an adobe hut which would weather and decay tastefully. But in the era of prefab mobile homes, what gets left behind can be a piece of junk that looks junkier over time. As windows get broken and the shell gets stripped of wiring and any other parts that have any value. So, we've discussed some of this before, like why people might have an issue with people coming out on the flats and trying to live off grid. Some of whom may not have the money or the resources to do it, or even the technology. Like they might not have the proper heating and solar panels and things to make
Yeah.
it through the winter. And then what happens when they leave? And even when they are there, what happens to the trash they generate or the sewer and stuff like that? Costilla County had more than 45,000 5-acre lots, and most of this land was of little value. So property taxes did not generate enough revenue for the county. With such a massive area to administer and a small tax base, there was little enforcement of many rules, such as requiring dwellings to have at least 600 square feet of living space, so no tiny homes were allowed. There were also restrictions on long term camping. Many homesteaders live out of compliance for years undisturbed. So there are rules in place to keep some of this in check. You can't have a small, tiny home there. You cannot go there and just camp indefinitely. So you had to have some kind of a semi-permanent structure at least, and have some permission to live there. And you know, in 2015, the county began a crackdown on the people living out on the flats. They had hired a land use administrator and transferred a couple of deputy sheriffs to the enforcement detail. By all accounts, these officers took their new job with gusto, usually focusing on the septic requirement. Landowners found to be lacking. So if the people didn't have septic requirements, they were often given 10 to 30 days to put one in place, or else face fines of 50 to $100 a day. And I was thinking about why they may have come to this specific rule, because there are other requirements that they can like fall on and nitpick and annoy people with to sort of drive them away. But I think this septic tank requirement falls in like a sweet spot where it is complex, easy enough to detect whether it's there or not, and then the issue is complex enough to be able to rectify on the part of the people. Because if you just go and tell them, oh, there's no tiny homes allowed, it's way easier for me to add an addition. I can just spend a couple of weeks on the property, put my time to it, and then I have, instead of 400 square feet, I now have 800 or 900 square feet, you know? So the septic thing is where you can go and be like, quickly just look at the property and see that it's not there. And then to be able to fix it, you can't just fix it overnight. You need a contractor to come in, put the lines in place, and do all the work to sort of get that up to not code, but yeah.
Yeah, that's really strategic. I mean, they know that none of these prairie dwellers are going to be able to afford, not only afford, I don't even think they're worried about that. That's just like their other ace in their hand. But getting a contractor to go out there after
Yeah.
you've got three bids or one bid or nobody shows up. Like it's just not going to happen. So it's a way for them to flush it and clear the land. I thought it was weird that they have this thing about tiny houses because the trailers are basically as small as a tiny house. I mean, I don't know what the general tiny house is, but they're kind of trailer like. So is there some stipulation about that too? Because they're all kind of seem to be living in trailers. A lot well, not the Grubers, but
I mean,
uh,
a trailer would have more than 650 square foot or 600 square feet of living space, no?
I don't
A
know.
25-foot long trailer?
Um, sure. Like maybe, I don't know. They're
Or
not that,
maybe you, if you attached two together, then it would have. Or again, same
no,
thing,
because
right?
like they
They're
can
not
only
enforcing all the rules that are in the book. They're only enforcing the one that is really difficult for them to fix.
yeah. I mean,
Even if
no.
they see it's
uh,
not 600 square feet, they're not going to go and uh, trouble them about it. They're just going to go and trouble them about the lack of septic tank because they know that is an expensive problem.
Right. Um, I mean, the trailer can only be 8 feet wide to be on a road. So if it's 25 feet, it's 200 square feet max, and that's
Yeah.
without anything in it. If it's 53, you're still at just over 400. Um, so I don't know, and no trailer's 53. That's got to be like a semi trailer that's that big. And I guess those like double wides or single wides would qualify, but it just seemed like a weird thing to nitpick on, especially given the trend of tiny houses, and I don't know, I was reading something today about kind of solving the homelessness problem, and there's some company that's building these little box houses that, have a complete kitchen and bathroom and living room, whatever, that they can put up for a couple 25 or $30,000 a piece. Anyway, um, yeah, I just thought that was a strange thing, especially
Yeah.
when strategically they're like, oh, no septic tank, here's your red sticker to, solve this or vacate. And then, you can imagine that they do talk about like some of those guys being, you just said it, that they're kind of aggressive initially.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, yeah.
So fear spread as low-income residents of the flats received summonses regarding septic systems that were tantamount to an eviction notice. People who had invested their every penny in the home got ready to just walk away and leave everything behind. I kept thinking some would challenge the order in court, but as the county had probably guessed, nobody had the money to hire a lawyer. In a desperate situation like this, many bid tearful goodbyes to long-time homes, and others found common cause in far-right ideologues. So there's two things going on. One, people in the Costilla County will complain about how when these people leave, the trailers that they leave behind look junkier over time. And then on the other hand, they're sort of forcing them out of their homes and they're forcing them to abandon their trailers and their homes to, and leave. So they're creating or they're perpetuating the problem that they're complaining about.
Yeah.
And then this is interesting. So, in a desperate situation, a lot of people just abandon and leave. And then there are some people who find common cause with far right ideologues who said the government had no right to force people from their own property. So, in the valley, there are some people, I don't want to put numbers, but there are some people who consider themselves or call themselves sovereign citizens, which means that they are separate from the United States and they don't believe in the validity of any form of government. So for them, it's like the government or the country has no right to tell me what to do. These laws or whatever the courts pass is not does not apply to me because I am not part of United States. I am something separate and I am a sovereign citizen that exists outside of. or separate from the country of United States. So these people, the people who call themselves as sovereign citizens, they are on like the FBI considers them to be terrorists. So if you go to the FBI page and you Google sovereign citizens, a page comes up and they'll give you a definition and description on the common beliefs and stuff and why they're considered to be terrorists. So one of these guys comes down to the flats to counsel them about their rights and helps them organize. Armed, con- Armed confrontations ensue, and several prairie people landed in the Costilla County Jail. Incidents like this are unfortunate because they become a stick to beat the prairie dwellers with. The county can always be like, told you these guys are trouble. Let's get them to leave the valley. So again, even in this instance, they're sort of perpetuating the dynamic that they are criticizing. They're saying that these people occupy jail cells more than the common population, but they're forcing them in a situation into a situation where they're vulnerable and therefore find common cause with people who are very right. I don't want to say right wing because it's not political. It's very, I don't know, anarchic, something like that, because they want to be outside of the fold of the government. And when people, when the government is causing you issues, you're more likely to think that like government authority is invalid anyway. This is my land, this is my property. Why do you care what I do with it? And they are like maybe the only people that are out there and can help them in some way. So yeah.
So yeah, I had a thought about we were talking about that a lot of the flat dwellers were relatively conservative. Um, and I was telling you last week about the kind of through line of kindness that seems to be just natural to the community. And I was talking to my friend John on about this, and he had I mean, these are like kind of two different points, but he had a mom that was kind of early stage dementia, and he was shutting down the state and had to drive back and forth to Northern Ohio from Washington, D.C. And he lives in D.C. and they lived in this little town in Northern Ohio that he kind of couldn't wait to get out of. But his dad was a pretty successful attorney, and um and everyone in town kind of knew that he was this attorney that, had a big horse ranch, um and they kind of everybody kind of knows what everyone's roles are. And there's a little bit of a presumption about what John and his parents and his family would be like compared to, the common folk or whatever. They kind of would do that, us versus them thing. And even though that's true, and even though they could presume his politics were not in alignment with theirs, I told him this thing about this kindness um, through line. And he said, yeah, that's just how it is when you get to small town America everywhere. He said, if if somebody's on the side of the road with a flat tire or a battery or some car issue or whatever, regardless of the weather, if you're in his town, um, somebody's going to pull over. They don't care, what your politics are, what your gender is, what your color. Like, I mean, some of that may matter, but according to him, of course, he's a white guy, so maybe it's a different kind of
Yeah.
rule book. But he said that he'd done this trip so many times, and it's like 10 hours the drive or maybe more. That when he was in DC and he saw somebody, that had a car issue, he would pull over and help them. And every time he did there, they were just gobsmacked with like, I can't believe that you stopped. Thank you so much. And they would like send him, get his address and send him gift cards or cheese or, whatever thing from where they're from. And we're just thrilled that somebody saw them.
Yeah.
And in this community, it seems like, there's some common threads there. So I started thinking about that throughout the week. And, um, you said something about last last podcast. You said something about why why people are attracted to the San Luis Valley. And one of the comments you made was that they were there to build a better future. And something about that statement, I mean, it's a common statement, um, didn't sit right. And it seems, and maybe this is just my inference, but it seems like it'd be more appropriate to say they're there to build a better present, because like there's just such an interaction of with the landscape and just having to work so hard to live. I mean, like when you go
Yeah.
camping and you're done camping, you get back to your house or whatever, and all the stuff kind of has you have a full kitchen, you have plumbing, like you have some basic stuff that you don't have camping. Um, Whenever Carrie and I get back, we're like, I don't know when we're gonna do this camping thing again. It's a lot of work. And like they're camping basically for a life. And it's so like there's something about thinking about that lifestyle. And then, if I can't, like, the politics part of, being conservative, there's certain aspects I think of that harder existence that are like, look, if I got to get something done, nobody's going to come out here and do it for I got to do it. So I'm fairly capable and resourceful, and if I need help I know who to call on or where to go. But otherwise I've got this. I don't need some other entity coming in and telling me you know h- how to do it better or differently or what's wrong with me. I'm self-sufficient.
Yeah.
So from that vantage, um you could see why voting against your what's it what's the term where people vote despite it being in their bed voting
Against your
conservative.
interest.
Yeah. They all would be if they're voting conservatively or if they're like pro Trump, because he's he's on the red team, and the red team kind of leaves everyone alone or whatever. That self-sufficiency model kind of bleeds through. But it's not like they're the same thing as they used to be. It's not Teddy Roosevelt conservatism, it's Trump conservatism, which has no one's interests in
Yeah,
in
except
just his.
himself and his friends.
Yeah, his friends and
And the life on living on the flats is like more difficult than camping in a few different ways. One is garbage disposal. When you go camping, you can just bring all the trash with you and dump it out. You out there, you sort of have to figure out how to burn it, and then, plumbing and
wind.
yeah. So in the next part of this chapter, Ted rides with the county enforcement. So he figures that before he starts working with La Puente and possibly moving on to the flats, it is a good idea to ride along with the Costilla County enforcement to see their side of the situation. So he goes out with a couple of people, Trinidad Martinez, who is the land use administrator, and one of his officers, Cruz Soto. So we'll spend a little bit of time with these guys. So it's important to like remember who they are. Trinidad Martinez is the land use administrator. So he's like the boss hired by the Costilla County to on the enforcement detail, basically to make sure uh, land use laws or rules are being followed. And then Cruz Soto is his officer. Cruz Soto is a tattooed guy with is tattooed with an armed pistol. Um, Trinidad Martinez was in a Denver Broncos shirt, so he looks more casual. He's the boss, but he doesn't have to like have a gun on him all the time and stuff like that. Soto is the cop, so he walks around with a gun. Martinez had left the valley to study criminal justice in Denver, but had moved back because this was where his people were. He had no training in land use planning, but he felt his cause was just. He says, I'm tired of seeing shacks and campers, what you can see off the highway. People with modest ambitions doing as little as possible. So now we get some insight into the other perspective. We've spent some time with people who think favorably of people, what guys on the flats are doing, but then now we spend some time with the people who are working for the county. So for him, it's like Lance Cheslock described these people as modern day pioneers who are out there to sort of live on their own terms. And then for Martinez, these are people with modest ambitions doing as little as possible. So he takes this whole moving out to the flats as a cop out from society. You're here because you don't want to work. He believed their reluctance to spend money complying with code wasn't always tied to poverty. Some spend a huge amount of money feeding their animals, for example. They show up here out of the blue and disrespect our culture by not obeying the law. So that's their argument that these guys don't follow the law, don't follow the rules, so they are violating our culture in some way, so we don't like them. And Ted asks if, when they're out, Ted asks them if they're going somewhere in particular, if they have like addresses to hit, or they're just looking around. So Martinez says the latter. We can't cover the whole county, but we always find something. They had 1,200 square miles to patrol and 30,000 parcels of land. So it's a massive area. So the method is to like go around, see what they can find, be more random in their approach rather than have a checklist or a list of addresses to hit. It's just go spend some time on the flat, see what you can find, and trouble some people.
It's
Um,
crazy. 1,200 square miles is bigger than Phoenix.
yeah,
Like, good luck with that, you know? Hey,
yeah,
the thing that's like I get that there's a presumption from crews that these guys are too lazy to work or they're criminals or like there's a lot of assumptions that that anyone not in the community, any of these communities in probably the world really, um, would make presumptions about the poor, is kind of what this gets down to. Um, and if Cruz is kind of seeing them as like they're able-bodied, they could have a real job and live in a crappy apartment in whatever fill in the blank town, if that's his definition of life. So like I get that presumption, but I also, what I think gets lost in the storytelling is that he's not right, but he's not entirely wrong either. Like if you've been to any of these places, like there's a percentage of the occupants that are a little shady. I think, it's fairly safe to say.
yeah,
So if he's just, you know, generalizing that all of them are hiding something, and it's just how long do you want to look around before you find something? Um, then it's that he's gonna find something, but it's not a fair, you know, I'm a hammer, I'm gonna go find a bunch of nails kind of. It's I don't think it's that black and white, obviously. Anyway,
yeah. And as a part of his job, he sees a lot of those shady characters and what they're up to
yeah.
as well, right? And then Ted asks them if they use satellite imagery or drones to figure out properties that don't comply with code. But Martinez says they don't have that kind of budget. So Ted at this point has been talking to people on the flats as well as people in La Puente. So he's already aware of the sort of things that Costilla County does to get people to move or to, you know, make their time a little worse on the flats. So through the grapevine and through rumors, he had heard that the county probably has satellite images and they use drones to fly the valley and to see which properties are complying with code and which ones aren't, which seems plausible. So Ted is just confirming that, but at least Martinez to his face says they don't have that kind of they don't they don't have that kind of a budget. And I was thinking about the address, why they don't go out with a checklist or specific addresses to hit. They have 30,000 parcels of land, right? And a lot of them are going to be completely empty. Some of them are going to have um, trailers on them, but no one living there. And then there are going to be others with trailers on them with people living there. There's just all different kinds of situations going on. So it's just better to be random and unpredictable in what you're doing, I guess. On the drive, they find more lots were vacant than occupied, and the first property they go to had a marijuana grow of about 20 plants, which looked very healthy. Nobody was home, but Martinez figures they must have come out here often or the plants would have been dead. A visual inspection showed no septic system, so Cruz Soto wrote up a summons and posted on the door of the trailer. So the first property they go to, they look around, there's no one there. There's marijuana plants, weed plants, but which look very healthy. So he figures they must come out there. And then they don't really meet anyone, but they still write a summons, post it on the door, and they leave. That is sort of their system, I guess. And the next property they go to was much more abandoned. Soto and Martinez had been up there before, and they tell Ted that the owner used to post a bunch of sovereign citizen signs on the fence. Like so many others who have walked away, the person had left behind a small structure open to the elements and a lot of junk. In addition, he'd left a sign warning to would be intruders of fatal sickness. It said next to the drawing of a skull, deer, mice which carry deadly virus have inhabited this building. A third of the people get infected and die within 1 to 2 weeks. For your safety, please stay out. This was like a new gambit they had seen. And this is a property they were aware of. This is one of the sovereign citizen people who, for some reason, had abandoned the property and left. So it was empty, there was nothing there. They just see the sign and then they leave. And they're back on the highway, and Martinez points out to an empty trailer that they had stopped at a month ago, where they contacted the owner of the plot by mail, and they said that to the best of their knowledge, the lot was empty. So these guys, they see a plot on the side of the highway. They contact the owner of the plot, and the owner says that I have not been there in ages. I think the lot is empty. And then they're like, no, there is a trailer on your property. And he says, I'm that's not mine. I don't know who lives there. So someone had basically camped on a land that was not theirs, and then eventually had abandoned the trailer on that property. The property is not theirs, and they abandoned the trailer there and left,
I could
which is
see that as a strategy too. Like you say, I don't know whose that is, and just deny any wisdom of it so that you don't have to take accountability, maybe. Because, I mean, like, if they're going to randomly go hit 30,000 properties, like imagine every time you drive, if you're 16 years old, you're worried about all the cops on the road because you're probably doing something wrong or you're presuming you're not that good. And if a cop just sees you, he's going to pull you over. I mean, they're living that all the time, but they know they're doing something wrong. They don't have the money to do anything about it. So it's just a lottery of bad luck that you're waiting for. So you would strategically do stuff like,
yeah,
put up the HANA virus warnings or that lie about the property or make it look like it's vacant because isn't it yeah, it looks like it's abandoned, but they have like 100 marijuana plants that are totally healthy, so somebody's clearly been there. Um, yeah, that it would be a little bit of like low level warfare to have to deal with that. Like you're scratching as much money together to just buy the land than put your, old recycled trailer or shack on it, only to have the county tell you all the stuff you have to do that you can't afford. Like it's already bad enough just the weather. Now you got to deal with this layer.
Yeah. And I'd never considered that the guy he may have actually lived there, but then just denied that it was him. So you sort of raise your hands and be like, I don't know who that was, so you can't cite me.
Not me.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Next, they take Ted up a hill to show them a gravestone next to an old RV camper. The gravestone reads Zachariah H. Ruiz, January 8th, 1950 to November 1, 1965. So this is a gravestone for who was a boy at the time who died and was buried there in 1965. There was an iron structure next to the camper, pipes that look as though they had once supported a plastic for a greenhouse. And then Soto begins to say that, so you can see they had a grow and then they abandon it. And then as he says this, his eyes fall upon a wide ditch where there are more healthier plants. So this is more like a strategic move that the guys are doing, that they have an abandoned grow over there that the inspectors, if they come and they just look, that is what they see and they're like, okay, it's an abandoned property and they just leave. But there is another grow that his eyes fall upon, which has about 100 healthy plants in plastic sacks that help plotting soil and were irrigated via tubes from cisterns that held water with fertilizers dissolved in. So it's a very sophisticated system that they have. They have plastic sacks and soil in it with an irrigation system so that they don't have to visit as often. So Martinez praises the plants and says that these guys really know what they're doing. And then Ted asks if he's going to report them because having 100 plants is against the law or the land use agreement as well, unless you have like a commercial license. So the Martinez says no, it's not really a code thing. So I'm guessing licensing for marijuana grows is a criminal law thing, and the remit of the land use administrator is to enforce zoning rules and stuff like that. So I'm
Just
guessing,
septic tanks, no
yeah,
weed.
the
Call the
two things
cops.
fall into like completely different jurisdictions. So he doesn't bother with anything that is outside of his sort of remit.
But not only does he not bother with that, I don't think he bothers with telling the cops. Like it's how serious are they about getting him out of here? If they really wanted to double down, they'd say, hey Steve, you want to come out to this one? There's an illegal grow or whatever, and then shut him down that way. But yeah, I don't know. There's at least some kindness in there from the cops, but I don't really get that whole interaction. I mean, I know the jurisdiction thing, but it would be a simple phone call, or you see him at the coffee shop and say, oh yeah, this one.
And then a while later, they stopped to tell a man from Denver and his son that unless they had a camping permit, it was illegal for them to park their RV on their own property for any length of time whatsoever. So this is like intimidation technique on overdrive. So they're just driving, they see a guy with his son setting up camp, putting their RV or whatever on their own property, and they go and tell them that you cannot do that for any length of time whatsoever. And to the man's credit, he seemed not to believe that could be so. And in fact, camping is allowed for up to 14 days without a permit. So, and these guys, Martinez and Soto, they hand him a pamphlet and they tell him to come by the office and get a permit or we'll be back. So this is basically the permit that they're talking about doesn't really exist. So they're like, in some ways, they are conning him into giving them some free money so that he can camp on his own land. And when I read this, I think of like the difference between these guys approach when they see someone that is new to the valley versus Matt in the previous episode where he goes to them and he tells them that, hey, I'm Matt from La Puente, I'm the rural outreach worker. He gives them his card and then he's like, if you need firewood or clothes or anything in the future, let me know. And these guys just go and be like, not allowed to be here, even if it's your own property, any length of time whatsoever, get out right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. One
yeah.
wants them to survive and stay in the valley, and the other wants them to leave.
And the "will be back" is like, sure you will.
Yeah.
You can drive
They
out in the
threaten
middle of
him.
nowhere to make sure I'm gone in 2 weeks. Like, what? Don't you have
Yeah,
something better to do?
yeah. And they drive out again, and then on their drive, they avoid the section where deputies had apparently been fired upon. Martinez says, I'm not going to go in there if I think they're going to shoot. Ted asks who did the shooting. Right wing terrorists, he said. We've got a couple of them in jail now. So this is something that they've dealt with in the past, and it is part of the package of the people on the valley. Like there is a presence of these um, far right sovereign people who think that law enforcement or any law whatsoever doesn't apply to them. So as long as they have their 5 acre or 20 acres, then they can do whatever they want. And if police come or even if county comes and tells them anything, it is sort of like, you're on my property. What are you doing? Get out. And then sort of leads to confrontations and stuff. A while later, they pull into a property of a friend of those right wing terrorists Martinez and Soto were talking about. So we meet one of the guys from, the sovereign individual category. Martinez and Soto stayed in the truck as a skinny, highly agitated man emerged from a makeshift compound with a cell phone recording the entire encounter. Ted recognizes him as Vince Edwards, a member of the right wing opposition. Edwards had been arrested about a year earlier for a failure to appear in court, probably because sovereign individuals, as they call themselves, don't believe in the authority of courts and government, right? So he must have gotten a summons for something, and he decided that doesn't apply to me. Courts are invalid. I'm not going to go. So that's probably why he didn't show up. And then cops came to his place to arrest him, but the arrest wasn't smooth. When the cops got there, he sent out an SOS via Facebook asking for other sovereign individuals to help him. He says police are trying to arrest someone unlawfully. So that is his whole thing, right? He's sending that message out to people who are like him, who think about police and government in the same way, that police are trying to arrest someone unlawfully. If you can, this is where I need you. Come help. So this, if if the people on the other side of this Facebook message are not careful about what they're doing, this could end in like a skirmish between the sovereign people and the police, which is not what you want, right?
Yeah, and people say HOAs are bad.
Yeah.
It's like the worst HOA ever. You gotta shoot somebody or get all your buddies to like stake you out for however many hours before you surrender. And then you got 9 months in jail
Yeah.
because you didn't show up to court. Like, what else do they say? I mean, he must have done some other stuff,
I mean,
but
9 months is probably for resisting arrest, right? So the deputies believe Edwards to be armed, call for backup, and then he holds them out for 3 hours. He surrenders after 3 hours. So I'm guessing stuff happened within that 3 hours that constitutes for more of a jail time versus just not appearing in court, even though I don't know what the penalty for not appearing in court is. But I'm
it's not
guessing
9 months
there's
generally.
more to it than that. Yeah.
Like a fine, maybe, and then
Yes,
they
but if
judgment
police
or
come to your doorstep and you send out a message to a bunch of people
yeah,
basically asking for backup to come and help you fight the police, the court will take that
yeah.
into consideration and give you a higher
Yeah,
penalty.
yeah, it's extreme. But I mean, I get it at the same time because it's like, man, we're poor and you guys are just like kicking us in the teeth on top of being poor. And like it's like you're judging our entire existence and just making it harder. And
Yeah.
the poor tax on top of it is if I even resist or complain or tell my compatriots or buddies or neighbors that this is bullshit. I just get more time in jail. Like it's just this isn't a normal United States that they're living in. It's just
Yeah.
shitty. But I mean I'm not condoning what he did, but I get at some level you'd have to kind of you're at war, a little insignificant war, but it's your territory. They're kind of
For
encroaching.
them, it's very significant.
Yeah.
So when he goes to them, this Vince Edwards guy, he tells them, "You're trespassing, and I'm asking you that you leave this property immediately." And then they respond to him saying, "We heard somebody bought this land from you. So we came to tell you that this is, so we came to tell them that this is still in violation." So now they're acting as if, "Oh, we thought someone else bought this property. So we came to tell them that this land is still in violation of the septic tank requirement. And you need to fix this and that or the other."
Yeah.
And they tell him that, "We think someone brought this land from you. Show us
Yeah.
some paperwork to prove that it is still yours." So they're basically harassing him at this point. Like they're there to irritate him.
Yeah.
They know he's a needly character. And then he's like, "No, you're the county. Get your own paperwork."
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a
The,
good response from him.
it
Yeah.
is because he just sees right through their bullshit. It's like, yeah, okay, you're the county.
Yeah. Why are you believing people's hearsay? If someone has bought this from me, you should have the paperwork of who the
We
latest
heard
owner is.
from a local
Yeah.
coyote and a jack that someone else bought this. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So this entire visit is to like rile Vince Edwards up. It's basically like part of their plot to go and annoy as many people as they can, and then some of them will up and leave. And I get why Vince Edwards specifically, I get why they want a character like that to not live in the flats because to them, he is trouble. Like if you're in the code enforcement detail or if you're a cop and if you have people who say we don't believe in your authority and who even FBI considers to be terrorists, then you don't want that sort of people living in the flats, right?
But it's exactly the kind of people that are
Yeah,
gonna
that get
represent
attracted.
to the flats to whatever Cruz's point.
Yeah,
Um, like they're all like this or whatever is his idea. Get them all out of here, as if, and then what? You got a bunch of worthless land that is clean, sort of.
it's at least nice to look at. So we get to that now. So he says, so all the visits are now done. They may have met more people, but this is sort of the insight we get into the visits that Ted makes with the code enforcement people. So as they drive away, Martinez tells Ted that the problem with guys like him is that they tell other people in the area that they can do whatever they want without permits, without septic systems and everything else. So everybody that buys property out here and comes start developing it looks at their videos and they get the impression that they can do whatever they want. And then they get mad at us when we cite them and put them in the court system. So the problem with Vince Edwards is not just that he himself is violating the code and does not have a tank or whatever. He's sort of spreading this ideology of sovereign individuals to other people and telling them that you can do whatever you want with the land. This is your land. The government should not be able to tell you what to do with it and things like that. So it is more of the reach that he has and the broader influence that he has in the valley with other people and then other people like him who are doing like that and then that just becomes like a network effect and the idea spreads amongst other people, right? So he is more of a problem to them than just a common person who does not have a septic tank on his property.
Yeah. Yeah.
Martinez's skepticism about the flat dwellers seemed in line with the scone that Tona had referred to, the indigenous perspective that flat dwellers were dirty squatters. Growing up, I would look out there on the glass. Sorry. Growing up, I would look out there on the flats and think, why would anybody put a house out there? Longtime residents of the valley who lived in towns along the edges felt that you'd have to be a weirdo or just desperate to live in the flats, and that life had been better when fewer people did. So, this is sort of the nostalgia that these people have. They're looking back at a time where the flats didn't have a lot of people on it, because as we've discussed, the off-grider life really became accessible once solar technology reached a certain level and mobile homes became of a certain quality and construction became easier. And then that is when living off grid becomes a viable option because without solar panels, you really don't have any electricity. And then how do you survive there? So the uptake of people moving to the valley had really started in the last 20 to 30 years, maybe. So that is why they look back to a time where all of this land used to be empty versus now there's so many trailers parked on it and people burning their trash and the trash gets blown away by the wind and stuff like that. Martinez continues, what's sad to me is I grew up here, and when I was in high school, there was almost nobody. We used to be able to ride four wheelers and motorcycles and go hunting, but now you'll be on trails like the ones my father built and you run up against a trailer. Since the new people came, we can't use the land that is rightfully ours by Spanish land grant. We're fighting to maintain our culture and our way of life. So the Spanish land grant was in 1843. The Spanish government of Mexico at the time encouraged settlement in this region. So the Spanish government of Mexico has all this land in northern Mexico that is uninhabited, and they want people to move there. So they encourage that settlement by offering them land. And when that territory was incorporated in the US in 1848, and technically the US was supposed to honor the terms of the Spanish land grant, but over the years, disputes between Hispanic settlers and Anglo ranchers about the ownership and access to land have been pretty common. So when this area was under the Spanish rule under Mexico, the government encouraged people to move. And then when it came under the ownership of the US, technically the US was supposed to honor the same rights to the people, but then privatization happened and stuff like that. So it changed a little bit, and there were disputes. There have been disputes between Hispanics and Anglo ranchers, and I think we've discussed in the previous chapter how the land is, even though it is private land, it is still free for grazing. So it is the responsibility of the owner of a plot to fence animals out, right? The animals, if they go on the property, they're not technically trespassing. So I think that is part of that sense within the Hispanic people that this used to be our land. We could use it for grazing our animals. And maybe the government was like, all right, fine, we let you graze your animals even when it is owned by other people or something. So even though it's not their private property, they have some access to it.
Yeah, that's sticky, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sure that the after 1948, the adherence to the Spanish land grant thing was pretty loosely enforced.
Yeah.
But
1848.
I think you said last week that the Alamosa Hispanic community kind of looked down their nose at the prairie dwellers. Um, and I mean, not to make too many assumptions, but Martinez is a typically Hispanic name. Um, he's kind of, fallen in line with that, especially if he grew up there.
Yeah, he says that, right? That the land is rightfully ours by the Spanish land grant. So he believes that he has ancestry over
Yeah,
there. He says that my father built some of these trails.
so that's
And
neither here.
yeah, and Ted says in conclusion of this part that while I'd known the long-term running dispute between longtime Hispanic residents around the valley and the owner of the giant tract of mountain property to the east known as the Taylor Ranch, I had never heard anyone suggest that even the undesirable subdivisions belonged in some essential way to the Hispanics. Yeah, so you see the dichotomy here. Like Martinez thinks that the land belongs to the Hispanic people because they had lived there for generations and developed the trail system, as he mentioned. And like the ideas of land ownership also vary from one culture to another. So maybe they don't think of, when they think of the flats, they don't think of it in terms of privatized chunks of land. They think of it as it's just there for people to use because it's such a worthless piece of land. Why do you want to live there and own it anyway. So for them, that sort of privatization doesn't make sense. But the trail system that he mentions that his father worked on may have just been those dirt roads that are between the plots, So even as they've lived there for generations, private ownership was taking its hold. Like it has been happening over time. It may not have been enforced by the people who own that land because they were just not there. You know, they owned the land on paper and they stayed somewhere else. Now that people are actually coming there to live because it is possible to live, it is becoming an issue. But when you build those roads, because you're subdividing the land, with the subdivision come private ownership and property rights. So it's like moving into a new time and a new culture with that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like more of a disregard of all of it. If you're going to subdivide it, what are you subdividing? Like, didn't somebody else have the deed to all of it? It's with the Spanish language, like they've already kind of thumbed their nose at the grant the moment they decided to subdivide it or to
Yeah.
farm or the great yeah any of that.
That would
So
be their argument, right? Okay, you're subdividing it. You think you're selling it to people, but you don't have the right to sell it because this is our land.
it smacks of like Native American kind of stuff of like, wait, what do you mean? You white people come in here and start saying the land's yours. The land's no one's,
Yeah.
and everyone's simultaneously. Like they don't even get the idea of it. And these guys are adhering to, an old law before Mexico or Spain lost that part of America, which, they lost a big part of it all at once. 80 1843. Like there's nothing. God, man, it had to be really desolate in 1843.
Yeah.
You know, like they would just look at a map and say, like, I don't know, these 500 square miles. Like nobody's going out and surveying it. It's too crappy. Maybe in the summer, I guess. But then in 1948, yeah, by then it just falls apart. So it is kind of relevant that the territory was incorporated in 1948. Because when does Colorado?
1848. That's a
Oh, it's a
typo.
typo. Okay, so
Eighteen forty-eight.
it
Yeah.
says 1948 on the notes. Um, okay, that's totally different. Because I was thinking, well, that guy's dad maybe did build a few trails, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
incorporated in 1848, and then those subdivisions and that development happened sometime in the 1970s. So I think, as I understand it, during that Sangre de Cristo land grant, that land was given to a couple of families. So it was divided into, I think, two estates. And then through those estates, it was further subdivided and sold to people.
if it was
So
subdivided,
that happened in 1970.
and somebody got paid. If there was three families that owned all of it, then they sold it. I
Yeah.
mean,
In
unless
the
it,
1970s. That happened in the 1970s.
okay, okay. So that's why he's bitter because it's recent enough that his dad would have been part of that. I mean, but he's not saying he's one of the family. So this is just a tribalism kind of thing that like, you know, it was the Spanish land. Now it was stolen from us, is kind of the mentality. But, is the Martinez family one of the three families that owned it? I don't think so.
No, no, no.
It's just a race thing.
So when he says our land, he means the Hispanics, not my
Yeah.
family, but us as people.
Yeah, and he's not, I mean, I guess he's saying Hispanic. He's not saying Mexican. Um, but he's not saying Spanish. Anyway, yeah, it's goofy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a contrast. You have somebody that's like, hey, you need firewood or tires or shoes or whatever, I'll get you. But these guys are like, get out.
Yeah. So in the
Yeah.
next part of the book, next part of the chapter, we just look at how Ted moves into the valley. So we look at him like buying a truck, land, and a dwelling of some sort. You need three things to live in the valley, right? You need truck to get around, you need some land, and then when you have the land, you need some kind of a dwelling. And since he's not going to be living there full time, he's going to live on a temporary in a temporary trailer, so he needs to buy that. Truck he gets from New Mexico, which is a white 1998 Toyota Tacoma which is more than 20 years old and has over 200,000 miles on it. It has a manual transmission with an old-fashioned four-wheel drive where you had to get out of the car and turn a dial on the hubs to engage it. But Ted needed something cheap and reliable, and this fit the bill. A place to live is more tricky because Ted wasn't in the valley and he wasn't intending to live there full time. So buying land on the flats was not an option yet. And there weren't many listings online for a place to rent. Plus, many people there were eccentric and liked to live alone. And so it would be a very difficult thing to find like a good fit to move into because when you're living on the land next to someone, he's the closest person to you maybe for a couple of miles. So you don't want to just show up like you would in an apartment complex and, live next to someone you don't know or don't like. So after a while, Tona tells Ted about a family she had met in La Puente's outreach office. The Grubers were a mom and dad and five daughters whom they homeschooled. They lived in a mobile home on the flats, and the father had recently had a cancer operation and could use some extra cash. So Tona tells him that I've met this family. The father has had an operation recently. They could use some cash. They seem like nice people. You live next to a family. Your camper will be taken care of when you're not there. So this is a good option. Maybe you should take a look at it. So Ted drives down to the Gruber's place with Matt, and on the way, Ted asks Matt if he knows anything about the ruins next to Angelo's place that look like a collection of abandoned trailers, sheds, and other junk. So we discussed Angelo and his property in the last episode. So now Ted is asking Matt if he knows anything about just a bunch of trailers that he saw next to their property that were abandoned. So he's like, "What's up with all that?" Like, I asked his mother, she didn't tell me anything. Have you heard anything about it? So Matt says that he had heard that one of the residents had recently triggered an explosion when he was attempting to make shatter, a cannabis concentrate that takes the form of a small translucent yellow piece that are typically breakable, which is why they're called shatter. Manufacturing it requires heat and solvents and is famously dangerous. The guy who triggered the explosion apparently suffered a concussion but was spared further injury because instead of being indoors, he'd been inside a fabric walled greenhouse which was incinerated. So there was someone making shatter, which is like a concentrated form of cannabis, and the place explodes. Ted asks him, "Did it make the news?" To which Matt says, "The news? No, I don't think so. There isn't much news out here." I love this response. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas sort of things.
Yeah.
You don't ask
Or
questions,
nobody cares about this part of the world.
nobody cares. Yeah. There's no reporters here. The county enforcement can barely keep up with the amount of land. You think there's news
Okay.
reporters coming here to see what's going on?
No, you'd have to have a bunch of murders or something for anybody to show up.
Yeah. And to Ted, this highlights the importance of a guide or a contact like Matt who lives on the flats and is in has some insight into the grapevine of the area, right? Because most of what happens on the flats does not end up in a newspaper or other medium. Without a guide like Matt, he wouldn't have access or knowledge of things like these. As they continued driving, Matt found himself in unfamiliar territory. Because the flats are so big and the road signs so unreliable, it is difficult to navigate or know the entire area. Ted asks Matt if he has used a map to get around. So Ted had a large format road atlas that Lance had loaned him, which divides Colorado in like 94 different sections, 94 pages. But when it comes to the flats, it had been practically useless because it did not include information about hundreds of dirt roads. So if you don't have information about those dirt roads, then you don't really know where you are once you leave the paved highway, right? So that book is basically useless for him. So Matt says, yeah, they don't really work. You have to get one of these. And he hands him a DIY hunting map and says that it is a brand well known to the hunters in the Rockies. Have you seen one of these hunting maps? I'm curious as to what detail they have that a 94-page atlas won't have.
Um, the only thing close to it that I've seen is like a hiking map, not a hunting map. So I would imagine they're like topographical, kinds of maps with some notes about where the deer hang out or whatever. But no, I haven't never really hunted anything officially.
Okay. Then they go meet the Grubers, Frank and Stacy, husband and wife, and they have 5 daughters and a lot of pets and farm animals on the property. So they're homeschooling their kids, and they have a farm and bunch of animals that they have on the property. Frank tells him that he had several inches of colon removed during an operation in Colorado Springs. So that is why they sort of need some funds. He's suffering from cancer, I believe, and he's had an operation recently. And then he points to a spot about 200 feet from their house, a clearing in the low bushes just off the driveway. That may be a spot where Ted could live if he got his own trailer. So he tells them that that is where we have some area by the side of our house. You can basically live there if you can find a trailer, and the rent would be $150 a month. And then Ted tells him that that sounds fair, and he would let him know once he finds a trailer. So he sees the property, he meets them, he likes them, the price is reasonable, and just the fact that it is next to a family. I think in that situation, I would rather be next to a family than, just some
Yeah.
guy
Well,
who is
what's his
sort of
name?
shotguns in his living room.
Yeah, right, right. Sharpen his knives every day. Um, Fun fact, the colon operation happened at your wife's hospital.
No, my wife works in Pueblo.
I know it was in Pueblo that he had it.
No, in Colorado Springs. So in the
I
city
thought,
that I live in.
oh, I thought it was Pueblo for some reason.
No. So it's
Huh.
in the city that we live in, but not
Okay,
that where
okay.
she works. Yeah. So so now he has the pickup truck. He has a reasonable piece of land where he can live for a reasonable amount, and then now he needs
A
the
trailer.
trailer. And the
Yeah,
trailer comes from Geneva Duarte. He had seen it in her driveway when he had stayed there. It was old, but it was clean. It was 25 feet long with a full-size bed, kitchen, um, a kitchen booth that could be converted into another bed, a tiny bathroom with a shower. And she had used the trailer only on summer fishing trips, she said, and was looking to sell. So, again, this is also like a good place for him to buy the trailer because he knows Geneva and he trusts her. So, if she's selling it, it's more of a mentally, it's you feel more confident in that purchase. It was an Aerolite 7 manufactured in 1998, the same year as Ted's truck. Synchronicity. So I think Ted likes the fact that it is from the same year, which is why he sort of one people who look for signs find signs
yeah.
anywhere, right?
I mean, we're always looking for signs. It's just, are you paying attention? I read that and I was like, who cares? It said
Yeah.
still he has it on his head. I gotta buy a trailer. Oh, it's a 98. Oh, that's perfect. Like,
Yeah.
is it?
I mean, if it was 96 or 2000, he probably wouldn't think about it. But the fact that it is 98, he thinks about it and he's like, oh, yeah, it's in the stars. The price was $4,000, and to which Ted agrees. So he now has all the pieces in place to be able to move into the valley. He has the truck, he has the land, and now he has the trailer. And at this point, this is a stage where he has done his week-long visit where he's like shadowed Matt for a little bit, met Tona and things like that. And now he is looking to move into the valley, but he's not looking to settle. Right now, he doesn't know how long this. this venture is going to be.
Yeah.
He's not looking to buy, or he doesn't know what his experience is going to be. He's just going to go there, spend a couple of months or more than that, and then visit every few months when his teaching schedule allows, and see what sort of project comes together and what happens. But yeah, this is where we are right now.